After reading your short stories about waking up 10 inches tall, I noticed one thing that is common in everyone's writing. The stories were great and full of excitement, but sometimes the sentences were hard to understand because the stories are full of run-ons and ramblers. Today we are going to work on creating concise sentences. Creating concise sentences helps you express your ideas in a way that excites and keeps the reader. Rambling and run-on sentences tend to confuse and distract the reader. Today I will be working with you to create concise sentences instead of rambling and run-on sentences to help you become better and more confident writers. Rambling sentences include numerous ideas within one sentence, but the sentence is grammatically correct. Run-on sentences are also grammatically correct, but they contain an excessive amount of subjects for a single sentence. So why don't we want run-ons and ramblers? There are a few different reasons why we don't want them. For one, they can often confuse and distract the reader. They make it very difficult to understand what's really important in the sentence, and they're also very hard and even awkward to read aloud. So how do we fix them? We create concise sentences. What is a concise sentence, though? They are simple, and they're very easy to understand. In a concise sentence, the reader knows what is most important. The reader is also able to read the stories out loud, and the listeners can better understand them. Through learning how to write a concise sentence, you will become much better writers, and readers and listeners can enjoy your stories even more than they already do.
It is really helpful to know the definitions of rambling and run-on sentences. Let's now take a look at a few random writing samples. Working through these writing samples will help you become better writers, and it will help your writing become a bit more concise. Here is our first example of a rambling sentence. One sunny, brilliant Saturday, as the dust sparkled against the sun in the morning as I woke up, I felt like my blankets weighed 20 pounds. This is clearly a rambling sentence. A more concise way to write this sentence would be, I woke up on a sunny and brilliant day as the dust sparkled against the sun, and my blankets felt like they weighed 20 pounds. It is important to make sure the reader understands where you are headed with the sentence. Using the semicolon to break up the thoughts allows the reader an easier time following your story. Plus, it is easier for the reader to follow your sentence if you start with the subject rather than the action. We want the reader to be able to read the sentence and not use up all their mental oxygen before they get to the next sentence, right? It is really hard to talk when you're out of oxygen, so we want to make it easier for the reader to enjoy your story without worrying about running out of air. Let's now take a look at a run-on sentence. I was sitting on my desk, but I couldn't play the PlayStation Vita because it was too big and I couldn't push down the buttons, so I just sat there thinking. We can see this as a run-on sentence that includes some great ideas. The sentence just needs a little more work for it to become more grammatically correct. Let's take a look at one of the options. I was sitting on my desk, but I couldn't play the PlayStation Vita. It was too big, and I couldn't push down the buttons. I decided to just sit there and think. This adjusted sentence does a few things. It breaks up the ideas into more manageable pieces by adding a comma next to the conjunction but that's already there. Adding a comma in the second sentence before the conjunction accomplishes the same task as it did in the first sentence. We're just making our sentences more grammatically correct. The meanings behind the sentences did not change. Our readers will be impressed with our awesome grammar skills. Now, let's take about 10 minutes, and I want each of you to write a few rambling and run-on sentences. Once we put together some of our own sentences, then we will exchange these sentences with our seat partners. We will read these writing samples, and then we will practice rewriting them for our partners. Everyone uses rambling and run-on sentences in their writing. It takes a lot of practice for us to create sentences that are more concise and easy to understand for our readers. Thank you for working today on revising your seat partner sample sentences. We took a big step in becoming better writers today. Please turn the papers in at the end of class.
Now that we've had practice identifying and correcting run-ons and ramblers, let's take a look at some examples of student writing that have run-ons and ramblers in them. Let's read the first example. Now Zoe is living happily ever after in snowy Anchorage, Alaska with her family because she is of course a kid and still hopes her dream will come true so she can turn her brother back to a human being and also be able to learn cool spells to make her life a little easier. That was an example of a rambler. So how can we fix it? Here's an example of how this sentence can be written so that there isn't as much rambling.
All right.
Now, Zoe is living happily ever after in snowy Anchorage, Alaska with her parents because she is of course a kid. She still hopes that her dream will come true and that she will be able to turn her brother back to a human being and learn a few spells to make life a little easier. By splitting the rambler into two sentences and adding a few commas, we were able to change the sentence in ways that make it not only easier to read, but also sound better when read aloud. Now the second example, what do you think? Is it a rambler or a run-on? Let's read it and find out. So, I grabbed a leaf and jumped off the tree, using the leaf like a parachute. Once we landed, I started running around the hunting zone toward my house, dodging every obstacle. This one's an example of a run-on. How can we fix it? Let's try this. So I grabbed the leaf and jumped off the tree, using the leaf like a parachute. Once we landed, I started running around the hunting zone toward my house and dodging every obstacle. Again, adding commas and dividing the sentence into two sentences, we have made it neater and easier to read. Now that we've had some practice with ramblers and run-ons, you should be able to find, fix, and avoid these unwieldy sentences in your own writing.